All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of the Isolated Literary Society presents some stuff I'm going to read. We are starting a new series, I guess, of doing some Neil Gaiman short stories and novellas. Up to the time such as that somebody tells me to stop, because ostensibly this is illegal. He gave blanket permission on Twitter for people to do it for kids, and we're all children at heart or whatever. Or at least grown-ups need stories as much as children do. I think that sounds like the kind of thing Neil Gaiman would agree with. I'm gonna just skip around a little bit in Fragile Things, because this is my favorite collection of his short works. I also have Smoke and Mirrors. I'm not as familiar with that one. I haven't read it as many times. I have. That's a very good point, Michelle. I don't know that you guys aren't actually children. Every single person tuning into this live stream might have a children sitting with them. Yes, words. So, yeah, I've got Smoke and Mirrors as well. I'm not as familiar with that one because I have the audiobook of Fragile Things, and I've listened to it many times. It's delightful. But I went through it the other day and earmarked a couple of stories in that one that I think would be good to read as well. But I'm going to start today, I decided, with one of my favorite stories from this collection, The Flints of Memory Lane. So, buckle in. For Neil Gaiman's The Flints of Memory Lane. I like things to be story-shaped. Reality, however, is not story-shaped. And the eruptions of the odd into our lives are not story-shaped either. They do not end in entirely satisfactory ways. Recounting the strange is like telling one's dreams. One can communicate the events of a dream, but not the emotional content, the way that a dream can color one's entire day. There were places I believed to be haunted as a child, abandoned houses and places that scared me. My solution was to avoid them. And so, while my sisters had wholly satisfactory tales of strange figures glimpsed in the windows of empty houses, I had none. I still don't. This is my ghost story, and an unsatisfactory thing it is, too. I was 15. We lived in a new house, built in the garden of our old house. I still missed the old house. It had been a big old manor house. We had lived in half of it. The people who lived in the other half had sold it to property developers, so my father sold our half a house to them as well. This was in Sussex, in a town that was crossed by the zero meridian. I lived in the Eastern Hemisphere and went to school in the Western Hemisphere. The old house had been a treasure trove of strange things. Lumps of glittering marble and glass bulbs filled with liquid mercury, doors that opened onto brick walls, mysterious toys, things old and things forgotten. I love that little mention in there. If we can assume that the I in the story is in fact Neil Gaiman, and this one is at least mostly true, I like to think that it is, and that door that opens onto a brick wall was the inspiration for Coraline. He's probably said it in an interview somewhere, but I've never heard it, so I'll just go on thinking it. My own house, a Victorian brick edifice in the middle of America, is, I am told, haunted. There are few people who will spend the night here alone anymore. My assistant tells of her nights on her own here, of the porcelain jester music box that spontaneously began to play in the night, of her utter conviction that someone was watching her. Other people have complained of similar things following nights alone. I have never had any unsettling experiences here, but then I have never spent a night here alone, and I'm not entirely sure that I would wish to. There is no ghost when I am here, I said once, when asked if my house was haunted. Perhaps it is you who haunt it, then, someone suggested, but truly I doubt it. If we have a ghost here, it is a fearful creature, more afraid of us than we are of it. But I was telling you of our old house, which was sold and knocked down, and I could not bear to see it empty, could not stand to see it being torn apart and bulldozed. My heart was in that house, and even now at night, before I sleep, I hear the wind sighing through the rowan tree outside my bedroom window 25 years ago. So we moved into the new house, built, as I said, in the garden of the old one, and some years went by. Then the house was halfway down a winding flint road, surrounded by fields and trees in the middle of nowhere. Now, I am certain, were I to go back, I would find the flint road paved, the fields an endless housing estate. But I do not go back. I was 15, skinny and gawky and wanting desperately to be cool. It was a night in autumn. Outside our house was a lamppost, installed when the house was built, as out of place in the lampless countryside as the lamppost in the Narnia stories. It was a sodium light which burned yellow and washed out all other colors, turning everything yellow and black. She was not my girlfriend. My girlfriend lived in Croydon, where I went to school, a gray-eyed blonde of unimaginable beauty who was, as she often complained to me, puzzled, never able to figure out why she was going out with me. But she was a friend, and she lived about a 10-minute walk from me, a 10-minute walk away from me, beyond the fields in the older part of town. I was going to walk over to her house to play records and sit and talk. I walked out of our house, ran down the grass slope to the drive, and stopped dead in front of a woman, standing beneath the street lamp, staring up at the house. She was dressed like a gypsy queen in a stage play, or a Moorish princess. She was handsome, not beautiful. She has no colors in my memory, save only shades of yellow and black. And startled to find myself standing opposite someone where I had expected no one, I said, "Hello." The woman said nothing. She looked at me. "Are you looking for anyone?" I said, or something of the sort. And again she said nothing. And still she looked at me, this unlikely woman, in the middle of nowhere, dressed like something from a dream, and still she said nothing at all. She began to smile, though, and it was not a nice smile. Suddenly, I found myself scared, utterly, profoundly scared, like a character in a dream, and I walked away down the drive, heart thudding in my chest and around the corner. I stood there, out of sight of the house for a moment, and then I looked back, and there was no one standing in the lamplight. I was 50 paces from the house, but I would not turn around and go back. I was too scared. Instead, I ran up the dark, tree-lined Flint Lane and into the old town, and up another road and down the road to my friend's house, and got there speechless, breathless, jabbering and scared, as if all the hounds of hell had chased me there. I told her my story, and we phoned my parents, who told me there was no one standing under the streetlight, and agreed, a little reluctantly, to come and drive me home, as I would not walk home that night. And that is all there is to my story. I wish there was more. I wish I could tell you about the gypsy encampment that was burned down on that site 200 years earlier, or anything that would give some sense of closure to the story, anything that would make it story-shaped. But there was no such encampment. So, like all eruptions of the odd and strange into my world, the event sits there, unexplained. It is not story-shaped. And in memory, all I have is the yellow-black of her smile and a shadow of the fear that followed. That was The Flints of Memory Lane. In case anybody just joined us, in the collection Fragile Things by Neil Gaiman. Can I focus? There we go. Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories in this collection, because despite first of all, I love the point about things being story-shaped or not. And I also love that he kind of manages to make it story-shaped, even though the tale itself, just the tale of him saying this strange woman, is not story-shaped. He makes his telling of it story-shaped. Also, one of the reasons I like it is that I also kind of hate it, because I wrote a short story, which is not entirely dissimilar from this one, 2 years before Fragile Things was released. But I didn't publish it really anywhere. It was published on a website, but I don't know. I don't think anybody who doesn't know me would believe, having read that story, if they had also read Flints of Memory Lane. Nobody would believe that I didn't rip off Neil Gaiman in that story. But it's still on the internet. There's a website called fiction365.com that used to publish a new short story every day. They're not active anymore, but the site is still up. And they paid writers like a token payment to be like, well, no, we're making any money off of this project, but we appreciate you. So, you got $10 or something like that if they picked your story. And a short story I wrote called Gray, Black, and Ash, also referring to colors, one of them being black, like the yellow and black in his story. If you search Sarah Shea, Gray, Black, and Ash, you should be able to find it. Or you can go to sarahshea.bandcamp.com and listen to a really cool audio book version of it, read by my friend Philip, and featuring trumpet played by Phil Andrews of the Funk Brass Band. You can also experience the story that way. So if any of you have already heard it, I think you can probably see the similarities to this one. Or maybe no one else would think that story was similar. It just seemed extremely similar to me. I'm very sensitive to that. I'm always afraid of accidentally ripping people off without realizing it. Okay, well, that was only 10 minutes, so I'm going to go on to another short story. Some of them in here are quite long, so I don't want to accidentally pick a really long one, but here. We're going to, this is another one that's based, or at least appears to be based on a true story from Neil Gaiman's life. It's called Good Boys Deserve Favors. My own children delight in hearing true tales from my childhood. The time my father threatened to arrest the traffic cop, how I broke my sister's front teeth twice, when I pretended to be twins, and even the day I accidentally killed the gerbil. I have never told them this story. I would be hard put to tell you quite why not. When I was 9, the school told us that we could pick any musical instrument we wanted. Some boys chose the violin, the clarinet, the oboe. Some chose the timpani, the pianoforte, the viola. I was not big for my age, and I, alone in the junior school, elected to play the double bass, chiefly because I loved the incongruity of the idea. I loved the idea of being a small boy, playing, delighting in, carrying around an instrument much taller than I was. The double bass belonged to the school, and I was deeply impressed by it. I learned to bow, although I had little interest in bowing technique, preferring to pluck the huge metal strings by hand. My right index finger was permanently puffed with white blisters until the blisters eventually became calluses. I delighted in discovering the history of the double bass, that it was no part of the sharp, scraping family of the violin, the viola, the cello. Its curves were gentler, softer, more sloping. It was, in fact, the final survivor of an extinct family of instruments, the viol family, and was, more correctly, the bass viol. I learned this from the double bass teacher. Oh, Carolyn is home. Hey. Hello. Sorry, I started without you. Don't mind me. I learned this from the double bass teacher, an elderly musician imported by the school to teach me, and also to teach a couple of senior boys for a few hours each week. He was a clean-shaven man, balding and intense, with long, calloused fingers. I would do all I could to make him tell me about the bass, tell me of his experiences as a session musician, of his life cycling around the country. He had a contraption attached to the back of his bicycle on which his bass rested, and he pedaled sedately through the countryside with the bass behind him. He had never married. Good double bass players, he told me, were men who made poor husbands. He had many such observations. There were no great male cellists, that's one I remember, and his opinion of viola players of either sex was scarcely repeatable. He called the school double bass she. She could do with a good coat of varnish, he'd say, and you take care of her, she'll take care of you. I was not a particularly good double bass player. There was little enough that I could do with the instrument on my own, and all I remember of my enforced membership in the school orchestra was getting lost in the score and sneaking glances at the cellos beside me, waiting for them to turn the page so I could start playing once more, punctuating the orchestral schoolboy cacophony with low, uncomplicated bass notes. It has been too many years, and I have almost forgotten how to read music. But when I dream of reading music, I still dream in the bass clef. All cows eat grass. Good boys deserve favors always. After lunch each day, the boys who played instruments walked down to the music school and had music practice, while the boys who didn't lay on their beds and read their books and their comics. I rarely practiced. Instead, I would take a book down to the music school and read it surreptitiously, perched on my high stool, holding on to the smooth brown wood of the bass, the bow in one hand, the better to fool a casual observer. I was lazy and uninspired. My bowing scrubbed and scratched where it should have glided and boomed. My fingering was hesitant and clumsy. Other boys worked at their instruments. I did not. As long as I was sitting at the bass for half an hour each day, no one cared. I had the nicest, largest room to practice in, too, as the double bass was kept in a cupboard in the master music room. Our school, I should tell you, had only one famous old boy. It was part of school legend, how the famous old boy had been expelled from the school after driving a sports car across the cricket pitch while drunk, how he had gone on to fame and fortune, first as a minor actor in Ealing comedies, and then as the token English cad in any number of Hollywood pictures. He was never a true star, but during the Sunday afternoon film screenings, we would cheer if he ever appeared.
Pepper knows there's something in here for him.
Uh-oh, Pepper, is there something for you in this?
It's all the way at the bottom, Pepper.
Carolyn just came in with some groceries, and Pepper is just like trying to climb into one of the bags.
This is what he did last time I brought home that catnip rabbit.
Oh.
He dove all the way to the bottom of the
Pepper,
bag
Pepper, let her unpack.
I don't think you're going to be able to do that this time.
Pepper.
There's too many heavy things
Come
on
here.
top of it.
No, you're gonna have to physically remove him. All right. I'm sorry you all can't witness the cat shenanigans that are going on just a few feet away, but Pepper, come here.
He's like, I know it's in there.
All right. Anyway, I love this idea of a famous old boy. This is a very English thing. To refer to a former student as an old boy.
Yeah, that is a British thing, isn't it?
When the door handle to the practice room clicked and turned, I put my book down on the piano and leaned forward, turning the page of the dog-eared 52 musical exercises for the double bass. And I heard the headmaster say, the music room was purpose-built, of course. This is the master practice room. And they came in. They were the headmaster and the head of the music department, a faded, bespectacled man whom I rather liked, and the deputy head of the music department, who conducted the school orchestra and disliked me cordially. And there could be no mistaking it, the famous old boy himself, in company with a fragrant, fair woman who held his arm and looked as if she might also be a movie star. I stopped pretending to play and slipped off my high stool and stood up respectfully, holding the bass by the neck. The headmaster told them about the soundproofing and the carpets and the fundraising drive to raise the money to build the music school, and he stressed that the next stage of rebuilding would need significantly further donations, and he was just beginning to expound upon the cost of double glazing when the fragrant woman said, "Just look at him. Is he cute or what?" And they all looked at me. "That's a big violin. Be hard to get it under your chin," said the famous old boy, and everyone chortled dutifully. "It's so big," said the woman, "and he's so small. Hey, but we're stopping you practicing. You carry on. Play us something." The most terrifying thing someone could say to you when you're a child just learning to play an instrument.
Yeah.
The headmaster and the head of the music department beamed at me expectantly. The deputy head of the music department, who was under no illusions as to my musical skills, started to explain that the first violin was practicing next door and would be delighted to play for them. And "I want to hear him," she said. "How old are you, kid?" 11, miss," I said. She nudged the famous old boy in the ribs. He called me Miss, she said. This amused her. Go on, play us something. The famous old boy nodded, and they stood there, and they looked at me. The double bass is not a solo instrument, really, not even for the competent, and I was far from competent. But I slid my bottom up onto the stool again and crooked my fingers around the neck and picked up my bow, heart pounding like a timpani in my chest, and prepared to embarrass myself. Even 20 years later, I remember. I did not even look at 52 musical exercises for the double bass. I played something. It arched and boomed and sang and reverberated. The bow glided over strange and confident arpeggios. Then I put down the bow and plucked a complex and intricate pizzicato melody out of the bass. I did things with the bass that an experienced jazz bass player with hands as big as my head would not have done. I played and I played and I played, tumbling down into the four taut metal strings, clutching the instrument as I had never clutched a human being. And in the end, breathless and elated, I stopped. The blonde woman led the applause, but they all clapped, even with a strange expression on his face, the deputy head of music. Oh, I didn't know it was such a versatile instrument, said the headmaster. Very lovely piece. Modern yet classical. Very fine. Bravo. And then he shepherded the four of them from the room, and I sat there, utterly drained, the fingers of my left hand stroking the neck of the bass, the fingers of my right caressing her strings. Like any true story, the end of the affair is messy and unsatisfactory. The following day, carrying the huge instrument across the courtyard to the school chapel for orchestra practice in a light rain, I slipped on the wet bricks and fell forward. The wooden bridge of the bass was smashed, and the front was cracked. It was sent away to be repaired, but when it returned, it was not the same. The strings were higher, harder to pluck. The new bridge seemed to have been installed at the wrong angle. There was, even to my untutored ear, a change in the timbre. I had not taken care of her. She would no longer take care of me. When the following year I changed schools, I did not continue with the double bass. The thought of changing to a new instrument seemed vaguely disloyal, while the dusty black bass that sat in a cupboard in my new school's music rooms seemed to have taken a dislike to me. I was marked in others, and I was tall enough now that there would be nothing incongruous about my standing behind the double bass. And soon enough, I knew there would be girls. That is, Good Boys is Her Favorites. Just forgot the title already. That was an appropriate follow-up. I think that one similarly deals with the idea of stories, real stories not being story-shaped. Hold on. A friend is calling me who's having a rough time right now, and I just want to let them know I'm not ignoring them. Hello. Hi. I'm in the middle of doing my live reading stream for today. That's okay. I just wanted you to know that I wasn't ignoring you. Yes, I will call you when I'm done. All right, bye. Sometimes it's important to take 20 seconds to let a friend know, hey, I'm not ignoring you. I didn't ignore your call or dismiss your call because I don't like you. Just doing something else. All right. Well, we're a little over 20 minutes. I'm going to take a chance. Okay, it's not as long as I remembered. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. I have never actually read this book cover to cover. I've listened to the audiobook version many times, but I think I've only ever picked up the book and picked out a story and read it. I've never read it. So most of the stories in this book, I don't have a good sense of how long they are because I don't have that physical sense of how many pages they took, right? When Neil Gaiman is reading you a story, time gets a little weird and you don't have a good sense of how long it is. So I don't think this one is as long as I thought it was. So I will wrap up today's reading with another one that is ostensibly a true story from Neil Gaiman's life, although I suspect this one is a little less true than the two previous. That is up to each of us to decide which one is truer and how true each of them are.
The truthiness?
Yes, the truthiness levels of each one. Oh, I'm going to get up and close the blinds since Carolyn is
busy with the groceries.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. It was perfect timing. I was just about to start a new story. Oh, Pepper, did you get a new toy? Now that it's out of the bag, you're completely ignoring it. Look, she got him a cute little.
I think he smelled the food that I got.
Oh, he's more. That's Pepper. Always more interested in food than toys. All right. I don't think he's too interested in the new things that Carolyn brought into the house to muck about with making any cameo appearances on the video today.
Sure,
So,
we'll find it soon enough.
all right. So, to wrap up our reading for today, I'm going to read the facts in the case of the departure of Miss Finch. To begin at the end, I arranged the thin slice of pickled ginger, pink and translucent, on top of the pale yellowtail flesh, and dipped the whole arrangement, ginger, fish, and vinegared rice, into the soy sauce, flesh side down. Then I devoured it in a couple of bites. I think we ought to go to the police, I said. And tell them what, exactly? Asked Jane. Well, we could file a missing persons report or something. I don't know. And where did you last see the young lady? Asked Jonathan in his most policeman-like tones. Ah, I see. Did you know that wasting police time is normally considered an offense, sir? But the whole circus. These are transient persons, sir, of legal age. They come and go. If you have their names, I suppose we can take a report. I gloomily ate a salmon skin roll. Well then, I said, why don't we go to the papers? Brilliant idea, said Jonathan, in the sort of tone of voice which indicates that the person talking doesn't think it's a brilliant idea at all. Jonathan's right, said Jane. They won't listen to us. Why wouldn't they believe us? We're reliable, honest citizens and all that. You're a fantasy writer, she said. You make up stuff like this for a living. No one's going to believe you. But you two saw it as well. You'd back me up. Jonathan's got a new series on cult horror movies coming out in the autumn. They'll say he's just trying to get cheap publicity for the show. And I've got another book coming out. Same thing. So you're saying we can't tell anyone? I sipped my green tea. No, said Jane reasonably. We can tell anyone we want. It's making them believe us that's problematic. Or, if you ask me, impossible. The pickled ginger was sharp on my tongue. You may be right, I said. And Miss Finch is probably much happier wherever she is right now than she would be here. But her name isn't Miss Finch, said Jane. It's... And she said our former companion's real name. I know, but it's what I thought when I first saw her, I explained. Like in one of those movies, you know, when they take off their glasses and put down their hair. Why, Miss Finch, you're beautiful. She certainly was that, said Jonathan. In the end, anyway. And he shivered at the memory. There. So now you know. That's how it all ended, and how the three of us left it several years ago. All that remains is the beginning and the details. For the record, I don't expect you to believe any of this. Not really. I'm a liar by trade, after all, albeit I like to think an honest liar. If I belonged to a gentleman's club, I'd recount it over a glass or two of port late in the evening as the fire burned low. But I'm a member of no such club, and I'll write it better than ever I'd tell it. So here you will learn of Miss Finch, whose name, as you already know, was not Finch nor anything like it, since I'm changing names here to disguise the guilty, and how it came about that she was unable to join us for sushi. Believe it or not, just as you wish. I am not even certain that I believe it anymore. It all seems such a long way away. I could find a dozen beginnings. Perhaps it might be best to begin in a hotel room in London a few years ago. It was 11 a.m. The phone began to ring, which surprised me. I hurried over to answer it. Hello? It was too early in the morning for anyone in America to be phoning me, and there was no one in England who was meant to know that I was even in the country. Could you, any of the crackly plastic stuff, could you maybe like wash in the sink and just,
Sure.
Sorry.
No, okay.
I'm just not sure how much it carries over to the recording.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
It was too early in the morning for anyone in America to be phoning me, and there was no one in England who was meant to know I was even in the country. Hi, said a familiar voice. adopting an American accent of monumentally unconvincing proportions. This is Hiram P. Muzzledexter of Colossal Pictures. We're working on a film that's a remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but instead of Nazis, it has women with enormous knockers in it. We've heard you are astonishingly well supplied in the trouser department and might be willing to take on the lead of part of our male lead, Minnesota Jones. Jonathan? I said. How on earth did you find me here?
Minnesota Jones.
You knew it was me, he said, aggrieved, his voice losing all trace of the improbable accent and returning to his native London, which I won't do London the disservice of trying to recreate here. Well, it sounded like you, I pointed out. Anyway, you didn't answer my question. No one's meant to know that I was here. What in the world is that?
Oh, someone's running a saw or something. Do you want me to close the door?
Yeah, maybe. Just
Okay. Okie dokie.
that seems very loud to me. I don't know how much you guys can hear it. Oh, of course now it stops. Anyway, you didn't answer my question. No one's meant to know I was here. I have my ways, he said, not very mysteriously. Listen, if Jane and I were to offer to feed you sushi, something I recall you eating in quantities that put me in mind of feeding time at London Zoo's Walrus House, and if we offered to take you to the theater before we fed you, what would you say? Not sure. I'd say yes, I suppose. Or, what's the catch? I might say that. Not exactly a catch, said Jonathan. I wouldn't exactly call it a catch. Not a real catch, not really. You're lying, aren't you? Somebody said something near the phone, and then Jonathan said, hang on, Jane wants a word. Jane is Jonathan's wife. How are you? She said. Fine, thanks. Look, she said, you'd be doing us a tremendous favor. Not that we wouldn't love to see you, because we would, but you see, there's someone. She's your friend, said Jonathan in the background. She's not my friend. I hardly know her, she said, away from the phone. And then to me, look, there's someone we're sort of lumbered with. She's not in the country for very long, and I wound up agreeing to entertain her and look after her tomorrow night. She's pretty frightful, actually. And Jonathan heard that you were in town from someone at your film company, and we thought you might be perfect to make it all less awful, so please say yes. So I said yes. In retrospect, I think the whole thing might have been the fault of the late Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond. I had read an article the previous month in which Ian Fleming had advised that any would-be writer who had a book to get done that wasn't getting written to go to a hotel to write it. I had not a novel, but a film script that wasn't getting written. So I bought a plane ticket to London, promised the film company they'd have a finished script in 3 weeks' time, and took a room in an eccentric hotel in Little Venice. I told no one in England that I was there. Had people known, my days and nights would have been spent seeing them, not staring at my computer screen and, sometimes, writing. Truth to tell, I was bored half out of my mind and ready to welcome any interruption. Early the next evening, I arrived at Jonathan and Jane's house, which was more or less in Hampstead. There was a small green sports car parked outside. Up the stairs, I knocked at the door. Jonathan answered it. He wore an impressive suit. His light brown hair was longer than I remembered it from the last time I had seen him, in life or on television. Hello, said Jonathan. The show we were going to take you to has been cancelled, but we can go to something else if that's okay with you. I was about to point out that I didn't know what we were originally going to see, so a change of plans would make no difference to me. But Jonathan was already leading me into the living room, establishing that I wanted fizzy water to drink, assuring me we'd still be eating sushi, and that Jane would be coming downstairs as soon as she had put the children to bed. They had just redecorated the living room in a style Jonathan described as a Moorish brothel. It didn't set out to be a Moorish brothel, he explained, or any kind of brothel, really. It was just where we ended up, the brothel look. Has he told you all about Miss Finch? Asked Jane. Her hair had been red the last time I had seen her. Now it was dark brown, and she curved like a Raymond Chandler simile. That's a way to describe someone.
That in itself is a fantastic simile.
Who? We were talking about Ditko's inking style, apologized Jonathan, and the Neil Adams issues of Jerry Lewis. This is somehow when he reads it, I never noticed how weird that statement is. They'd just been talking about a Moorish brothel. Anyway.
Yes.
But she'll be here any moment, and he has to know about her before she gets here. Jane is, by profession, a journalist, but had become a best-selling author almost by accident. Nice work if you can get it.
I know, right?
She had written a companion volume to accompany a television series about two paranormal investigators and had risen to the top of the bestseller lists and stayed there. Jonathan had originally become famous hosting an evening talk show and had since parlayed his gonzo charm into a variety of fields. He's the same person whether the camera is on or off, which is not always true of television folk. Now, I've never tried to see if you could figure out who he based these characters on.
Oh, I'm sure you could.
Based on that, that seems...
I'm sure you could.
Yeah, a journalist who wrote a best-selling companion book about, I assume, the X-Files, who is married to a former evening talk show host, both of whom are English. Presumably, if you tried, it wouldn't be that hard to figure out who they are.
To be the X-Files? Probably, I guess.
Well, I didn't say, that's why I said presumably. A television series about two paranormal investigators. That's not the only one, but it's the only one I could imagine having a companion book that would rise to the top of the bestseller list, to be frank.
Yeah.
But I've never bothered to look. And there's always a chance that he changed some of the details.
Yeah.
Or that this is absolute fiction and it's not even vaguely based on a real occurrence. Just the little weird details like the Moorish brothel make me think that these have to at least be loosely based on real people he knows. Anyway. I don't think they can hear you when you're all the way down the hall. All right. It's a kind of family obligation, Jane explained. Well, not exactly family. She's Jane's friend, said her husband cheerfully. She is not my friend. But I couldn't exactly say no to them, could I? And she's only in the country for a couple of days. And who Jane could not say no to, and what the obligation was, I never was to learn. For at that moment, the doorbell rang, and I found myself being introduced to Miss Finch, which, as I have mentioned, was not her name. She wore a black leather cap and a black leather coat, and had black hair, pulled tightly back into a small bun, done up with a pottery tie. She wore makeup, expertly applied to give an impression of severity that a professional dominatrix might have made. Her lips were tight together, and she glared at the world through a pair of definite, black-rimmed spectacles that punctuated her face much too definitely to ever be mere glasses. So, she said, as if she were pronouncing a death sentence, we're going to the theater, then. Well, yes and no, said Jonathan. Yes, we're still going out, but we're not going to be able to see the Romans in Britain. Good, said Miss Finch. In poor taste, anyway. Why anyone would have thought that nonsense would make a musical, I do not know. So we're going to a circus, said Jane reassuringly, and then we're going to eat sushi. Miss Finch's lips tightened. I do not approve of circuses, she said. There aren't any animals in this circus, said Jane. Good, said Miss Finch, and she sniffed. I was beginning to understand why Jane and Jonathan had wanted me along. The rain was pattering down as we left the house, and the street was dark. We squeezed ourselves into the sports car and headed out into London. Miss Finch and I were in the back seat of the car, pressed uncomfortably close together. Jane told Miss Finch that I was a writer, and told me that Miss Finch was a biologist. Biogeologist, actually, Miss Finch corrected her. Were you serious about eating sushi, Jonathan? Yes. Why? Don't you like sushi? Oh, I'll eat my food, cooked, she said, and began to list for us all the various flukes, worms, and parasites that lurk in the flesh of fish and which are only killed by cooking. She told us of their life cycles while the rain pelted down, slicking nighttime London into garish neon colors. Jane shot me a sympathetic glance from the passenger seat. Then she and Jonathan went back to scrutinizing a handwritten set of directions to wherever we were going. We crossed the Thames at London Bridge while Miss Finch lectured us about blindness, madness, and liver failure, and she was just elaborating on the symptoms of elephantiasis, as proudly as if she invented them herself, when we pulled up in a small back street in the neighborhood of Southwark Cathedral. Southwark? I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Southwark. It looks like Southwark, but I bet you that's not how it's pronounced. So where's the circus? I asked. Somewhere around here, said Jonathan. They contacted us about being on the Christmas special. I tried to pay for tonight's show, but they insisted on comping us in. I'm sure it will be fun, said Jane, hopefully. Miss Finch sniffed. A fat, bald man dressed as a monk ran down the pavement toward us. There you are, he said. I've been keeping an eye out for you. You're late. It'll be starting in a moment. He turned around and scampered back the way he had come, and we followed him. The rain splashed on his bald head and ran down his face, turning his Fester Adams makeup into streaks of white and brown. He pushed open a door in the side of a wall. In here. We went in. There were about 50 people in there already, dripping and steaming, while a tall woman in bad vampire makeup holding a flashlight walked around checking tickets, tearing off stubs, selling tickets to anyone who didn't have one. A small, stocky woman immediately in front of us shook the rain from her umbrella and glowered about her fiercely. This had better be good, she told the young man with her son, I suppose. Look, I know for a fact that he does kind of a Scottish accent for this character, at least Northern, in the audiobook, and the way he writes it, G-U-D, I couldn't do anything else. I'm sorry. It wasn't very good. I apologize to Scotland. She paid for tickets for both of them. The vampire woman reached us, recognized Jonathan, and said, Is this your party? 4 people, yes? You're on the guest list, which provoked another suspicious stare from the stocky woman. A recording of a clock ticking began to play. A clock struck 12, it was barely 8 by my watch, and the wooden double doors at the far end of the room creaked open. Enter of your own free will, boomed a voice, and it laughed maniacally. We walked through the door into darkness. It smelled of wet bricks and of decay. I knew then where we were. There are networks of old cellars that run beneath some of the overground train tracks, vast, empty, linked rooms of various sizes and shapes. Some of them are used for storage by wine merchants and used car sellers. Some are squatted in until the lack of light and facilities drives squatters back into the daylight. Some of them stand empty, waiting for the inevitable arrival of the wrecking ball in the open air, and the time when all their secrets and mysteries will be no more. A train rattled by above us. We shuffled forward, led by Uncle Fester and the vampire woman, into a sort of holding pen where we stood and waited. I hope we're going to be able to sit down after this, said Miss Finch. When we were all settled, the flashlights went out, and the spotlights went on. The people came out. Some of them rode motorbikes and dune buggies. They ran and they laughed and they swung and they cackled. Whoever had dressed them had been reading too many comics, I thought, or watched Mad Max too many times. There were punks and nuns and vampires and monsters and strippers and the living dead. They ran, danced, and capered around us, while the ringmaster, identifiable by his top hat, sang Alice Cooper's song, Welcome to My Nightmare, and sang it very badly. I know Alice Cooper, I muttered to myself, misquoting something half-remembered, and you, sir, are no Alice Cooper. It's pretty naff, agreed Jonathan. Jane shushed us. As the last notes faded away, the ringmaster was left alone in the spotlight. He walked around our enclosure while he talked. Welcome, welcome, one and all, to the theater of night's dreaming, he said. Fan of yours, whispered Jonathan. I think it's a Rocky Horror Show line, I whispered back. Tonight you will all be witnesses to monsters undreamed of, freaks and creatures of the night, to displays of ability to make you shriek with fear and laugh with joy. We shall travel, he told us, from room to room, and in each of these subterranean caverns, another nightmare, another delight, another display of wonder awaits you. Please, for your own safety, I must reiterate this. Do not leave the spectating area marked out for you in each room, on pain of doom, bodily injury, and the loss of your immortal soul. Also, I must stress that the use of flash photography or any recording devices is utterly forbidden. And with that, several young women holding pencil flashlights led us into the next room. No seats, then, said Miss Finch, unimpressed. The first room. In the first room, a smiling blonde woman wearing a spangled bikini with needle tracks down her arms was chained by a hunchback and Uncle Fester to a large wheel. The wheel spun slowly around, and a fat man in a red cardinal's costume threw knives at the woman, outlining her body. Then the hunchback blindfolded the cardinal, who threw the last 3 knives straight and true to outline the woman's head. He removed his blindfold. The woman was untied and lifted down from the wheel. They took a bow. We clapped. Then the cardinal took a trick knife from his belt and pretended to cut the woman's throat with it. Blood spilled down from the knife blade. A few members of the audience gasped, and one excitable girl gave a small scream while her friends giggled. The cardinal and the spangled woman took their final bow. The lights went down. We followed the flashlights down a brick-lined corridor. I've never been to a show just like this, but I feel like at least these parts are almost certainly based on something that Neil Gaiman actually saw.
Oh, I'm sure.
The second room. The smell of damp. Wow. The smell of damp was worse in here. It smelled like a cellar, musty and forgotten. I could hear somewhere the drip of rain. The ringmaster introduced the creature. Stitched together in the laboratories of the night, the creature is capable of astonishing feats of strength. The Frankenstein's monster makeup was less than convincing, but the creature lifted a stone block with fat Uncle Fester sitting on it, and he held back the dune buggy, driven by the vampire woman, at full throttle. For his pièce de résistance, he blew up a hot water bottle, then popped it. "Roll on the sushi," I muttered to Jonathan. Miss Finch pointed out quietly that in addition to the dangers of parasites, it was also the case that bluefins, tuna, swordfish, and Chilean sea bass were all being overfished and could be rendered extinct since they were not reproducing fast enough to catch up. Thank you, Miss Finch. The third room went up for a long way into the darkness. The original ceiling had been removed at some time in the past, and the new ceiling was the roof of the empty warehouse far above us. The room buzzed at the corners of vision with the blue-purple of ultraviolet light. Teeth and shirts and flecks of lint began to glow in the darkness. A low, throbbing music began. We looked up to see, high above us, a skeleton, an alien, a werewolf, and an angel. Their costumes fluoresced in the UV, and they glowed like old dreams high above us on trapezes. They swung back and forth in time with the music, and then, as one, they let go and tumbled down towards us. We gasped, but before they reached us, they bounced on the air and rose up again like yo-yos and clambered back on their trapezes. We realized that they were attached to the roof by rubber cords, invisible in the darkness, and they bounced and dove and swam through the air above us while we clapped and gasped and watched them in happy silence. The fourth room was little more than a corridor. The ceiling was low, and the ringmaster strutted into the audience and picked 2 people out of the crowd, the stocky woman and a tall black man wearing a sheepskin coat and tan gloves, pulling them up in front of us. He announced that he would be demonstrating his hypnotic powers. He made a couple of passes in the air and rejected the stocky woman. Then he asked the man to step up onto a box. "It's a setup," muttered Jane. "He's a plant." The guillotine was wheeled on. The ringmaster cut a watermelon in half to demonstrate how sharp the blade was. Then he made the man put his hand under the guillotine and dropped the blade. The gloved hand dropped into the basket, and blood spurted from the open cuff. Miss Finch squeaked. Then the man picked his hand out of the basket and chased the ringmaster around us while the Benny Hill Show music played. It's called yakety sax, Neil. "Artificial hand," said Jonathan. "I saw it coming," said Jane. Miss Finch blew her nose into a tissue. "I think it's all in very questionable taste," she said. Then they led us to the 5th room, and all the lights went on. There was a makeshift wooden table along the wall where a young bald man selling beer and orange juice and bottles of water, and signs showing the way to the toilets in the room next door. Jane went to get the drinks, and Jonathan went to use the toilets, which left me to make awkward conversation with Miss Finch. "So," I said, "I understand you've not been back in England long." I've been in Komodo, she told me, studying the dragons. Do you know why they grow so big? They adapted to prey upon the pygmy elephants. There were pygmy elephants? I was interested. This was much more fun than being lectured on sushi flukes. Oh, yes, it's basic island biogeology. Animals will naturally tend towards either gigantism or pygmyism. They're equations, you see. As Miss Finch talked, her face became more animated, and I found myself warming to her as she explained why and how some animals grew while others shrank. Jane brought us our drinks. Jonathan came back from the toilet, cheered and bemused by having been asked to sign an autograph while he was pissing. Tell me, said Jane, I've been reading a lot of cryptozoological journals for the next of the Guides to the Unexplained I'm doing. As a biogeologist, interjected Miss Finch. Yes. What do you think the chances are of prehistoric animals being alive today in secret, unknown to science? It's very unlikely, said Miss Finch, as if she were telling us off. There is, at any rate, no lost world off some island filled with mammoths and smilodons and epiornis. Sounds a bit rude, said Jonathan. A what? Epiornis. A giant flightless prehistoric bird, said Jane. I knew that, really, he told her. Although, of course, they're not prehistoric, said Miss Finch. The last epiornises were killed off by Portuguese sailors on Madagascar about 300 years ago, and there were fairly reliable accounts of a pygmy mammoth being presented to the Russian court in the 16th century, and a band of something which, from the descriptions we have, are almost definitely some kind of a saber-tooth, the Smilodon, brought in from North Africa by Vespasian to die in the circus. So these things aren't all prehistoric. Often they're historic. I wonder what the point of the saber teeth would be, I said. You think they'd just get in the way. Nonsense, said Miss Finch. Smilodon was a most efficient hunter. Must have been. The saber teeth are repeated a number of times in the fossil record. I wish with all my heart there were some left today, but there aren't. We know the world too well. It's a big place, said Jane doubtfully, and then the lights flickered on and off, and a ghastly, disembodied voice told us to walk into the next room, that the latter half of the show was not for the faint of heart, and that later tonight, for one night only, the Theatre of Night's Dreaming would be proud to present The Cabinet of Wishes Fulfilled. We threw away our plastic glasses and shuffled into the 6th room. Presenting, announced the ringmaster, the Painmaker.
Jeez.
The spotlight swung up to reveal an abnormally thin young man in bathing trunks, hanging from hooks through his nipples. 2 of the punk girls helped him down to the ground and handed him his props. He hammered a 6-inch nail into his nose, lifting weights with a piercing through his tongue, put several ferrets into his bathing trunks, and for his final trick, allowed the taller of the punk girls to use his stomach as a dartboard for accurately flung hypodermic needles. Wasn't he on the show years ago? Asked Jane. Yeah, said Jonathan. Really nice guy. He lit a firework held in his teeth. I thought you said there were no animals, said Miss Finch. How do you think those poor ferrets feel about being stuffed into that young man's nether regions?
Honestly, I'm kind of with her on that.
I suppose it depends mostly on whether they're boy ferrets or girl ferrets, said Jonathan cheerfully and heteronormatively. The 7th room contained a rock and roll comedy act with some clumsy slapstick. A nun's breasts were revealed, and the hunchback lost his trousers. The 8th room was dark. We waited in the darkness for something to happen. I wanted to sit down. My legs ached, and I was tired and cold, and I'd had enough. Then someone started to shine a light at us. We blinked and squinted and covered our eyes. Tonight, an odd voice said, cracked and dusty. Not the ringmaster, I was sure of that. Tonight, one of you shall get a wish. One of you will gain all that you desire in the cabinet of wishes fulfilled. Who shall it be? Ooh, at a guess. Another plant in the audience, I whispered, remembering the one-handed man in the 4th room. Shush, said Jane. Who will it be? You, sir? You, madam? A figure came out of the darkness and shambled toward us. It was hard to see him properly, for he held a portable spotlight. I wondered if he were wearing some kind of ape costume, for his outline seemed inhuman, and he moved as gorillas move. Perhaps it was the man who had played the creature. Who shall it be, eh? We squinted at him, edged out of his way. And then he pounced. Aha! I think we have our volunteer, he said, leaping over the rope barrier that separated the audience from the show area around us. Then he grabbed Miss Finch by the hand. I really don't think so, said Miss Finch, but she was being dragged away from us, too nervous, too polite, fundamentally too English to make a scene. She was pulled into the darkness, and she was gone to us. Jonathan swore. I don't think she's going to let us forget this in a hurry, he said. The lights went on. A man dressed as a giant fish then proceeded to ride a motorbike around the room several times. Then he stood up on the seat as it went around. Then he sat down and drove the bike up and down the walls of the room, and then he hit a brick and skidded and fell over, and the bike landed on top of him. The hunchback and the topless nun ran on and pulled the bike off the man in the fish suit and hauled him away. I just broke my sodding leg, he was saying in a dull, numb voice. It's sodding broken, my sodding leg, as they carried him out. Do you think that was meant to happen? Asked a girl in the crowd near us. No, said a man beside her. Slightly shaken, Uncle Fester and the vampire woman ushered us forward into the 9th room, where Miss Finch awaited us. It was a huge room. I knew that, even in the thick darkness. Perhaps the dark intensifies the other senses. Perhaps it's simply that we were always processing more information than we imagine. Echoes of our shuffling and coughing came back to us from walls hundreds of feet away. And then I became convinced, with a certainty bordering on madness, that there were great beasts in the darkness, and that they were watching us with hunger. Slowly the lights came on, and we saw Miss Finch. I wonder to this day where they got the costume. Her black hair was down. The spectacles were gone. The costume, what little there was of it, fitted her perfectly. She held a spear, and she stared at us without emotion. Then the great cats padded into the light next to her. One of them threw its head back and roared. Someone began to wail. I could smell the sharp animal stench of urine. The animals were the size of tigers, but unstriped. They were the color of a sandy beach at evening. Their eyes were topaz, and their breath smelled of fresh meat and of blood. I stared at their jaws. The saber teeth were indeed teeth, not tusks. Huge, overgrown fangs, made for rending, for tearing, for ripping meat from the bone. The great cats began to pad around us, circling slowly. We huddled together, closing ranks, each of us remembering in our guts what it was like in the old times when we hid in our caves, when the night came and the beasts went on the prowl, remembering when we were prey. The Smilodons, if that was what they were, seemed uneasy, wary. Their tails switched whip-like from side to side impatiently. Miss Finch said nothing. She just stared at her animals. Then the stocky woman raised her umbrella and waved it at one of the great cats. Keep back, you ugly brute, she told it. It growled at her and tensed back, like a cat about to spring. The stocky woman went pale, but she kept her umbrella pointed out like a sword. She made no move to run in the torch-lit darkness beneath the city. And then it sprang, batting her to the ground with one huge velvet paw. It stood over her triumphantly and roared so deeply that I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The stocky woman seemed to have passed out, which was, I felt, a mercy. With luck, she would not know when the blade-like fangs tore at her old flesh like twin daggers. I looked around for some way out, but the other tiger was prowling around us, keeping us herded within the rope enclosure like frightened sheep. I could hear Jonathan muttering the same 3 dirty words over and over and over. We're going to die, aren't we? I heard myself say. I think so, said Jane. Then Miss Finch pushed her way through the rope barrier, and she took the great cat by the scruff of its neck and pulled it back. It resisted, and she thwacked it on the nose with the end of her spear. Its tail went down between its legs, and it backed away from the fallen woman, cowed and obedient. There was no blood that I could see, and I hoped that she was only unconscious.
That's what we should do with you, Pepper. Just whack you on the head when you get too close.
Yeah, look at, there's our tiger.
Yeah.
He's batting down his new toy.
He's still amp rabbit or mouse.
There you go. You can watch him attack it while we read the rest of the story.
So ferocious.
In the back of the cellar room, light was slowly coming up. It seemed as if the dawn were breaking. I could see a jungle mist wreathing about the huge ferns and hostas, and I could hear, as if from a great way off, the chirp of crickets and the call of strange birds awaking to greet the new day. And part of me, the writer part of me, the bit that had noted the particular way the light hit the broken glass in the puddle of blood even as I staggered out from a car crash, and has observed in exquisite detail the way that my heart was broken, or did not break, in moments of real, profound personal tragedy. It was that part of me that thought, you could get that effect with a smoke machine, some plants, and a tape track. You need a really good lighting guy, of course. Miss Finch scratched her left breast unselfconsciously, and she turned her back on us and walked towards the dawn and the jungle underneath the world, flanked by 2 padding saber-toothed tigers. A bird screeched and chattered. Then the dawn light faded back into darkness, and the mist shifted, and the woman and the animals were gone. The stocky woman's son helped her to her feet. She opened her eyes. She looked shocked but unhurt. And when we knew that she was not hurt, for she picked up her umbrella and leaned on it and glared at us all, why, then we began to applaud. All right, Pepper, you can not have the spotlight any longer. No one came to get us. I could not see Uncle Fester or the vampire woman anywhere. So, unescorted, we all walked on into the 10th room. It was all set up for what would obviously have been the grand finale. There were even plastic seats arranged for us to watch the show. We sat down on the seats and we waited, but nobody from the circus came on. And it became apparent to us all after some time, no one was going to come. People began to shuffle into the next room. I heard a door open and the noise of traffic and the rain. I looked at Jane and Jonathan, and we got up and walked out. In the last room was an unmanned table upon which were laid out souvenirs of the circus, posters and CDs and badges, and an open cash box. Sodium yellow light spilled in from the street outside through an open door, and wind gusted at the unsold posters, flapping the corners up and down impatiently. Should we wait for her? One of us said, and I wish I could say that it was me. But the others shook their heads, and we walked out into the rain, which had by now subsided to a low and gusty drizzle. After a short walk down narrow roads, in the rain and the wind, we found our way to the car. I stood on the pavement, waiting for the back door to be unlocked to let me in, and over the rain and the noise of the city, I thought I heard a tiger, for somewhere close by, there was a low roar that made the whole world shake. But perhaps it was only the passage of a train. All right, that was a little longer than I thought it was, but we're wrapping up at just about an hour, so
Yeah.
That's fine. Anyway, that was the facts in the case of the departure of Miss Finch. Great title.
No, I've heard of that before, but I have never heard any part of the story before. I had no idea what it was about.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I must have seen it in like a list of his stories.
Okay,
probably.
yeah.
Because that name sounds familiar.
Well, if you
Definitely never read it.
if you ever want to hear the whole audiobook of this collection read by him,
You have
that's something special. Yes,
Nice.
I do indeed. It is really delightful. It's really unreasonable for him to be as good as he is at narrating and voice acting when he is also as good as he is at writing. But
Right. Yeah.
some people are just really good at more than one thing. Jerks.
He's good at telling stories in multiple ways.
That is very true.
Some people are gifted.
Anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in for our first installment of the short works of Neil Gaiman. We might do a little less time in the future. That went a little bit long. So maybe I'll actually look at the page numbers and the lengths of the stories next time before I start reading them. Wild idea. I will be back tomorrow with some more. Probably I'll just keep working my way through Fragile Things and then I'll switch over to Smoke and Mirrors. Or not. We'll see how it goes. I'm also considering at some point when I'm done with, when I get tired of Neil Gaiman, as if I could ever whatever. Possibly reading some short stories from this collection by Dorothy Sayers, which is not technically in the public domain, but I don't know. I think I could maybe get away with it.
I think you could.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see. So thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're new to the stream, I'm doing this every weekday around 6. And then every other Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific, I am doing live stream concerts. You can go to the list of live streams in my channel, and you can see all of the things that have been scheduled, and click set reminder if you want to do that. So you will get a little reminder when it's time for the stream. If time has become meaningless to you, as it has for so many of us. Yes, and also go to sarahshea.bandcamp.com. All the links are down there. If you want to hear my short stories that I wrote and narrated, one of them and 2 others narrated by some friends of mine, they're on Bandcamp. They are free to stream if you have the cash. It's lovely if you want to pay to download it, but you can totally stream it for free. So thank you, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
And I will not be in the